The Umbrella Kniffin Training System for Grapevines, Grape Video 11. The Umbrella Kniffin Training System is named after Mr. William Kniffin, who lived in the Hudson River Valley of New York State and devised this training system in the 1850s. The umbrella part of it is apparent when you look at the first approach to umbrella Kniffin training as devised by Mr. Kniffin in the 1850s. It started out with two long canes originating from a head region in the middle of the vine space and then being folded over and down and tied to a lower wire as seen here. And it's pretty easy to see why it was called umbrella and Kniffin after Mr. Kniffin's name. Well, we start with the advantages and disadvantages of this training system, and perhaps the best advantage of the umbrella Kniffin training system is that it's highly suited for varieties which are pruned to very long fruiting canes. And that includes the Labrusca varieties like Concord and Niagara and others of the Labruscas, and also a hybrid in particular that has Labrusca parentage, Cayuga White. Cayuga White has very long internodes, and so at times growers utilize today the umbrella Kniffin training system for that variety and for other long cane varieties that have very long canes when you prune them. Now when we train vines umbrella Kniffin today, we don't have the canes originate above the top wire but somewhat below, looking like this. And instead of having just one cane in each direction, we typically have multiple canes as shown here, so that the arrangement can look like this, or the head region where the canes originate can be even lower below the top wire by several inches or even a foot to make this training system work. Sometimes we double trunk vines, and this schematic shows umbrella Kniffin with double trunks, each trunk serving one side of the vine space. So this would be another variation of umbrella Kniffin training. In its simplest form, these are old slides from many years ago, but I still think you can get the idea. In its simplest form, we would then take a cane that originates below a top wire and then fan it up, over, and down and tie it to the lower wire, and sometimes loosely tie it to the top wire also, like this. Well, as vine size got larger over the years with the advent of better weed control and fertilizers, and the vines got larger and larger, there developed more and more of a need to add more buds, if you will, more nodes to the vines. So instead of one or two canes, we wind up sometimes with 6 and 8 canes originating from a central region and being tied in an array like this, so that the canes not only go up and over, but sometimes they go up, over, and then back up to spread out the buds on the vine space, such as this. And when we spread those canes out so that they're not lying exactly one against the other, we will typically tie them as they cross a wire. And here you see the use of twistums to tie the canes in about 3 places here. And those are loose ties. They are made so that there is space between the wire and the cane, so that as the cane grows over the growing season, it won't be girdled by the twistum. But that's typical tying technique for umbrella Kniffin training. Here's a schematic, a very old schematic that I drew many years ago, And this illustrates how the head region for umbrella Kniffin training can actually be quite low on the trellis relative to the canes coming up, over, and down, something like this. So that's both good and bad, and we'll discuss that a little more as we go on here on this video. Okay, well, another advantage of umbrella Kniffin training is that it reduces apical dominance of shoot growth. And what do we mean by that? Well, we're going to try to explain that with a series of schematics. We'll start with this schematic, and this is guillot training in its simplest form with a cane laid out a lower wire and a spur you see below that cane. When that grows out with the cane laid horizontally along a wire, at least some of the time, the shoot growth and eventually the cane at the end of the growing season can look like this. Here we have in that schematic showing that the canes grow strong out on the end or the distal end of that cane, and they grow strong back in the middle part of the vine or where the cane originated from the trunk. But in the mid portion of that cane as it was laid out, that wire, the shoot growth tends to be weak, often, not always, but often. And we attribute this to what we call apical dominance. On the other hand, when we use umbrella Kniffin training and we spread the cane up, over, and down, we tend to get a more uniform growth of shoots and development of canes, something like in this schematic. Of course, the shoots don't just stick straight up, they run along the top of the trellis, but schematically, we're just trying to show that with an arrangement of a cane tied up, over, and down, we tend to get more uniform shoot growth and reduce the dominance of growth out on the end of the cane. And why is that? Well, it has to do with the production of auxin hormones, plant hormones, in the leaves of the grapevine and other plants that will flow down into the vine and down towards the roots, but it does it in a gravitational way, so that when we have the cane bent like this over and down, those hormones don't just flow back to the center of the vine and down the trunk. No, they will flow gravitationally out towards the end and keep the dominance of the end of the cane and the shoots out on the distal end of the cane reduced, though, compared to a cane that is laying horizontally along the wire as we previously had shown. So this is a major advantage of umbrella Kniffin training, and as we'll say the same for pendelbogen training in another video, because it will spread out the growth better than if we have a cane laying horizontally along a wire. And we're going to show you a video of that now, but we wanted to explain it first. So here goes. So we're looking at a young cordon on a Cabernet Franc vine trained to Scott Henry, and you can see in the middle part of the vine we've had some strong cane growth, but as we go out in the middle part of the cordon, we can see that the canes did not develop that well because of the dominance of the growth out on the end. And here we're looking at the section where one vine converts to another, and we have strong growth out on the end of the cordons from both vines. And then as we continue down the row, in the midsection of the cordon, you can see again we don't have very strong growth until we get back into the center part of that next vine, and once again we have strong shoot growth and big canes. So on both of those vines we're seeing in the middle of the cordon fairly weak growth. Well, here's a still photo of the vines we just saw in the video. And you can see once again in the midsection of the cordon, right here, that there is weak growth compared to, in the foreground on your right, strong cane growth back in the center of the vine. And just on the edge of the oval you can see strong cane growth again, and that's out at the end of that cordon. So there has been the dominance of that growth out on the end that has prevented more uniform growth back in the midsection of the cordon. And that phenomenon we generally call apical dominance of the growth out on the end of a cane or out on the end of a cordon. Now that doesn't always happen. I put this picture in to show you that here's a section of cordon with fairly good strong growth along its entire length. And so we get this apical dominance effect often, but not always. And I can't really tell you why we don't get it always. But we do get it quite often when we train a cane straight horizontally out a wire. And that is reduced when we use umbrella Kniffin training. Here's my schematic once again showing that when we train canes up and over and down a wire, we tend to get much more uniform shoot growth from those buds along those canes than we would if we just put them straight out a wire horizontally. Let's move on. Advantage number 3. I put partially mechanizable because I want to tell you a really wonderful story, and it involves Roger and Nancy Scott, who are from the Bluff Point area of the Finger Lakes region of New York State. And this photo is more than 30 years old, and this couple worked so hard on about 60 to 70 acres, and they were so clever to mechanize the approach with umbrella Kniffin training on their vines. And I want to show you that in the following pictures. You can see this hedger that they devised, I would call an inverted L. It had a sickle bar vertically and then one horizontal that went over the top of the vines. And Roger would go out mornings and he would do some hedging with this on vines that had been trained umbrella Kniffin. Here are some unpruned vines. Sorry that these old slides don't project better, but you get the idea of all this growth of canes along the trellis from the umbrella Kniffin training that was done in the first year by hand. And then this is the first year of hedging the vines that Roger would go down the row and create this look, and then Nancy would follow up with shears and tidy up what got missed by the hedger. Well, they found that they could do this for more than 1 year. Here is a picture of what had been umbrella Kniffin training after 2 years of hedging. And this is not a very good picture, but my notes on my slides tell me this was after 3 years. And my recollection is they would, depending upon the vineyard, they would hand prune and then hedge for 2 or 3 years, depending upon the vineyard. And then they would hand prune back to get everything back in order and go through that cycle all over again. And even back when I knew them all those years ago, they had been doing this for more than 2 decades very successfully. A wonderful technique using umbrella Kniffin training with a partially mechanizable result here. Well, I want to add though that if you do this with mechanization, here is Concord in the year of hand pruning, and you get this wonderful cluster configuration of nice full clusters. But the more you mechanize and the more you machine prune, the more you're apt to get cluster configuration looking like this. Not quite to this extent, but you get smaller, looser, open clusters, and that's fine if you're mechanically harvesting for a processing crop, but you wouldn't want to do this if you were trying to grow any grapes for fresh market. Okay, advantages. Number 4. Well, one of the advantages is that when you umbrella Kniffin train vines, you prune them and free them up from the trellis every year. And here's another old slide from the Scott's Vineyard, and I tried to illustrate here that when you prune with umbrella Kniffin, you free the vine up from the trellis each year, and if you have imperfect trellis construction, it allows you to fix posts, tighten wires, and so forth before you tie the vines each spring. If you have a more modern trellis where you don't have those problems, this wouldn't be an advantage to you, but in many situations we would have imperfect trellises, and umbrella Kniffin allows you to fix that every year. Well, a 5th advantage of umbrella Kniffin training is that it does spread the shoot growth over the entire vine space if you manage the vines properly with this training system. By that I mean if you are putting out a lot of canes, don't just crowd them like this schematic shows with umbrella Kniffin training, but rather spread them out over the entire vine space, more like this, and you will get a more wonderful result with a more open canopy, and the fruit will not be so congested. Here again is the picture I showed earlier of double trunking vines and spreading the canes over the entire vine space. Something like this. Here's this picture again with many canes spread over the entire vine space, so you get more uniform growth along the trellis. And the fruit will be distributed both vertically, as shown here, and horizontally over the entire trellis. This is a picture I put in because we normally think of umbrella Kniffin training with native varieties, as I said, Concord or Niagara or a hybrid. This is actually a photo of Chardonnay that has been trained umbrella Kniffin, and you can see that it's spreading out the growth, this early season growth, fairly nicely on the trellis. Now, yes, there are disadvantages, as there are with all training systems. Well, although we showed you the very clever mechanization system that the Scots used with umbrella Kniffin, it really isn't what we would call systematically mechanizable with a well-defined fruit zone that can be mechanized as well as several other training systems. So that would be a disadvantage to umbrella Kniffin. And a major disadvantage is that it certainly does require long cane pruning and annual tying of the vines each and every year, which is not required with some of the other training systems that we have or will discuss. And that's a major factor, and that's probably the major factor why this is not as popular today as the training system used to be years ago. Here's again the tying that's required of the canes. In later years, growers got so that they actually only tied the canes out on the end of the cane and didn't do so much tying in the midsection of the canes as shown here. Nevertheless, it did require tying, and that's something that can take about 1 to 2 days of work per acre to tie vines back on the trellis like this. Here's a picture of a loose twist-em tie as it's going over the top wire, and I put that in to show how that was done years ago. Now another disadvantage is that it's not compatible with canopy management. That is to say, leaf removal is not possible around all the clusters because they're all over the trellis. You'd have to remove all the leaves on the vine to get fruit exposure with leaf removal when you're umbrella Kniffin training. And you can't shoot position because the shoots are originating at all different points on the trellis. So this is a disadvantage of umbrella Kniffin training. Here's a picture of Chardonnay once again, and you can see that although it gives an array of growth, there's nothing we're going to do here in terms of shoot positioning or leaf removal because the crop and the shoots are all over the place on the trellis. There is a schematic showing where the canes roughly lie as they go up and over the wire and down for the umbrella Kniffin training of this vine. Well, another disadvantage is that the renewal zone, or head in this case, may become heavily shaded on large vines. Well, here's our old schematic of umbrella Kniffin training again, and we just want to emphasize that as that head region is down in the vine and we get larger and larger vines, that there will be the tendency for the fruitfulness of buds from that head region to go down. And so the umbrella Kniffin training system can still be quite useful for small to medium-sized vines, but when vines get large and we have lots of growth on the vines, the desirability of umbrella Kniffin goes down and we should switch to other training systems. Well, that's it. Let's summarize that umbrella Kniffin has the following advantages. It's highly suited for varieties which are pruned to very long canes. It reduces apical dominance of shoot growth. It's partially mechanizable. There is an opportunity to repair the trellis every year when you use umbrella Kniffin training. And it spreads shoot growth over the entire vine space. Disadvantages? It's not systematically mechanizable as some other training systems are. Long cane pruning and annual tying are required, a big annual cost to the grower. It's not compatible with canopy management such as leaf removal and shoot positioning. And the renewal zone, or the head, may become heavily shaded on large vines. Well, that's it. We hope this is useful to you. We thank you for your attention. And in our next video, we'll talk about the top wire cordon training system, which is utilized very, very much these days for not only juice grape varieties like Concord and Niagara, but many wine grape hybrid varieties are trained with top wire cordon, and we're going to talk about that in our next video. Until then, happy grape growing.